Okay, thank you very much. President Olpak, President Chakrabarti, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of DEİK, Turkey's Foreign Economic Relations Board, I would like to welcome you all today's webinar on EBRD and Turkey, titled as The Way Forward. It's a great honor and privilege for us today to have with us Sir Suma, the President of EBRD, European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. And I'd like to thank DEİK for organizing this important and timely discussion, and special thanks to our President Olpak and President Sir Suma for taking their time out from their very busy schedules to join us today. Let me start by giving a quick overview of today's webinar. Following the introduction, I will be leaving the virtual floor to President Olpak of DEİK for his welcoming remarks. Then we will listen to EBRD President Sir Suma for his valuable remarks. And this will be followed by a Q&A session. And finally, I will give the virtual floor once again to both presidents for their final remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, as you may know, I am the board member at DEİK, and I'm also chairing Turkey-Kuwait Business Council, and I'm also the chairperson of LIMAC, where we operate in 17 countries around the world with more than 60,000 employees. And we work in construction, infrastructure, energy, ports, cement, and tourism businesses. And we also operate outside of Turkey in Kuwait, Senegal, Kosovo, Ukraine, North Macedonia. And ladies and gentlemen, and Turkey joined, as you know, the EBRD back in the year of 1991. And as of April 2020, there are 310 projects have been undertaken, and actively there are 235 projects that amounts for more than 12 billion euros EBRD investment. And the private sector share of the portfolio is very high, 95%. Turkey and EBRD, we have together invested billions of euros across hundreds of projects that has impacted the lives of millions of people. And I know our country is proud of what we have achieved together and looks forward to growing these collaborations in the years to come. And these partnerships are very valuable to us for a multitude of reasons, of course. But there are three very important reasons for me, where I would like to give a summary. Number one, the partnership between EBRD and Turkish private sector companies not only deepen the ties between our country and a vital global financial institution, but also opens doors for Turkish companies to do business outside Turkey. Number two, as EBRD promotes high standards of corporate governance and ethical conduct, the partnership presents clear set of rules, values, and guidelines to follow for private sector companies on their efforts to advance their transparency, corporate governance, and self-development. Number three, which is last but not the least, EBRD's explicit requirements in its mandate to promote environmentally sound and sustainable development encourages private sector companies to apply strict environmental and social standards to all the project finance. And we have applied all these standards even in the projects that EBRD has not financed, but we have applied these in the private banks that we have worked with. And ladies and gentlemen, going back to the start of this year, the world has changed almost beyond recognition. In order to protect public health and prevent the spread of the pandemic, countries had no choice but to adopt and have to take extraordinary measures, extensive lockdowns, restrictions on the freedom of movement, shops closed, factories closed, hotels closed, projects has been postponed or delayed. And the global economy was put in a huge challenge. It was, and it's truly a crisis like no other. But I believe an unprecedented opportunity now stands before us to leverage this crisis to create a more resilient world. We have already left behind almost 4 months, living on a different personal, social, and economic rhythm. New ways of working, new ways of communicating, new ways of living. And we witnessed a new order. Some people call this a new normal, taking shape, deeply affecting and changing our used to be business routines. Now we will all witness the recovery, and based on the performance, the history will decide how to remember and how to write about this crisis. And coming back to the title of today's webinar, The Way Forward, how do I see the way forward for us, for Turkey, for EBRD? Number one, the future of the global supply chain. I believe it's impossible to discuss the way forward without recognizing the changes take hold within the post-COVID landscape. And while I appreciate there are hard times to come, I'm also deeply optimistic about how Turkey will emerge from this global pandemic. In fact, we have already seen Turkish companies stepping into some of the gaps in the global supply chains as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. We always often talk about Turkey's crucial role in European trade and investments, but today we are seeing its importance as a member of the entire global economic community. Number two, employment and jobs. COVID-19 already put millions of workers at risk. We all have a part to play in rebooting this economy and creating jobs in the post-COVID environment. And here is where I see Turkey influencing the way forward for the world. While COVID-19 is a chance to rethink and invest on our essential infrastructure, now more than ever, the importance of governments working with the private sector to support infrastructure and construction projects to stimulate the global economies and jobs cannot be understated. And I'm truly excited to see how this growth in these areas with the support of EBRD transforms the economies of the world going forward. Number three, the digital economy. We know that the digital economy is the real winner of this crisis. Therefore, I believe we'll see an increase in the role of the fintech, digitalization, digital economy in the near future. There'll be new niches and exciting ideas as people realize that the digital tools like we are in now, on which we have relied during this period, are in fact providing important and vital services. And I think these are the areas of immense importance to Turkey, to the governments and the EBRD as well. And last but not the least, impact and collective impact. We need to recognize and realize collective impact. We have seen it together, the joint actions of individuals, governments, private sector companies, working towards collective goals, such as restoring our health system, social system, economy, resulted positively. Today's challenges are so hard to be addressed by only governments or private sectors. We have to combine our forces. It only works if all we work together. And I believe in this post-COVID period, we need to build meaningful stakeholder engagement between EBRD and Turkey, and we need to focus on our collective impact we can create together. Ladies and gentlemen, following this introduction now, I'd like to invite Mr. Olpak, President of DEİK. DEİK has been very active during this pandemic period. If you are not a member yet, you should do immediately, because the business diplomacy was really held very well by DEİK, and where I'm proud to be a member. And duly translated business as usual was the motto adopted by DEİK since the beginning of March. It was more busier than the post-pandemic period. Regular board meetings, business council board meetings, webinars, sector-specific, country-specific webinars, meetings with the ministers. I should say DEİK was on the roll during the pandemic. And I know personally that President Olpak was following all the meetings on a daily basis regularly. President Olpak, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ebrd. Thank you. You are a valuable member, not only a member, you are the board member, you are the chairperson for our Kuwait Business Council. So thank you. We are doing all together. Yes, for behalf of DEİK, may I welcome again to our members, attendees, and of course our valued guest of today, Sir Suma. Thank you so much for joining together. In fact, maybe today I should be the moderator and listen more together with Sir Suma and Ebrd, because she is having too much projects together with EBRD also. But let me allow, since she finally spoke about DEİK, let me continue speaking few words about DEİK, although you know it. Yes, DEİK is a business platform that has been continuing its activities on a voluntary-based private sector membership for 35 years. And in order to increase investment and trade between countries, we are going on with an understanding of business diplomacy. So far, we have 146 country-to-country business councils all over the world, and we have a particular close investment in our relationship with our European neighbors. Generally, we say, or we consider Turkey as the meeting point of two worlds, you know. We are somehow trying or melting pot of cultures, and as an industrial hub, we have always been a key gateway between East and West. I hope we are doing it. But it has never been more important than now. The upheaval caused by the ongoing pandemic has highlighted the fragility of the global economy and, of course, the supply chains on which it depends. Recovering from the enormous impact that this had on the market will take a long time, it seems so. It will also require strong partnerships as exist between Turkey and Ebrd. Our relationship, as we all know, goes back to founding of the Ebrd in 1991. And it has certainly been a fruitful one as far as we could see so far. If I'm not mistaken, Ebrd has run over more than 300 projects in Turkey and investing more than 12 billion euros. Sir Suma, you know it better than me. And those was supporting business and organizations from agriculture to energy. We will be glad, of course, to see that the partnership strength and Turkey's shares in Ebrd investments increased in the near future. And as those investments have a positive multiplier effect, especially in the economic relations between Turkey and the EU. Since we are going to speak about Turkey, let me continue saying something more. While Turkey has survived the crisis better than most, there will naturally be a significant impact for many businesses across all sectors in this country. Of course, lives must always come first and coming first, but inevitably the economy has to return to some form of normality and recovery. We don't know what is re-normal, but we are all discussing that. That is why the Turkish government's initiative to allow foreign arrivals under a strict hygiene framework, just as the other countries do, is so important. It allows us to begin a journey back to stability and growth without compromising the safety of our citizens and our guests, I believe. Yes, a major part of this will also be the key work that the Ebrd has done and continues to do. Investment and loans will be essential to help key industries and SMEs remain stable and grow. The coronavirus cannot make or should not make us lose sight of essential investments, renewable energy, R&D, healthcare, of course, transport, which is very important. We all again learned that transport infrastructure all remain important features of our economic growth more than ever. Now, there is now much talk of reshoring or nearshoring to protect supply chains, and Turkey here, we believe, offers two major advantages due to our geographical position, as I just say at the beginning, being at the crossroads of the world trade. As we all know, first of all, we know the quality of Turkish products thanks to our diversity in production factor environment and our long-standing industrial experience. Our rich production range, I believe, will enable us to be one step ahead of our competitors to become an important as an investment hub. Secondly, Turkish policymakers, as Ebrd has said, I'm trying to attend daily 5 to sometimes 10 webinars or panels together with our members, together with our ministers. So I'm really daily following that. Turkish policymakers are keen to improve the investment environment in Turkey. And Turkey's action plans rely on long-term sustainable economic growth, and hence all the economic reform programs are based on increasing production, R&D, and of course, exports. as it should be, private sector is at the heart of this process, and an important part from the budget is resource for incentive programs. Undoubtedly, we will see more cooperation we want to see, or between EBRD and Turkish manufacturers in this process of transformation of global production and investment activities. In this respect, access to direct and cost-effective finance will be of utmost importance for producers and investors, I believe. No doubt we will talk about all this now in more detail, and we will listen it from Sir Suma, but I think those of us here have long known that a stronger trade relationship between Turkey and Europe is overdue. We have a powerful entrepreneurial spirit, a young, highly educated population, and a cultural and geographical closeness, as I just said before, that makes us an obvious candidate. And Turkey's role and importance in the global economy will continue to grow. We believe so. Just on Sunday, we all know that the third runway of the new Istanbul airport, where Ebrd company also is a shareholder over there, has been opened. And within a few years after this corona, of course, it is said to be easily among the biggest in the world, as we are driving forward innovation on everything from renewable energy to e-mobility. And I believe together with the EBRD, Turkish business can be somehow at the center of the long road global recovery. We are ready to work closely, as we did so far, with you, and to make this a reality. Thank you so much again, Sir Suma. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. And now I'd like to invite, welcome actually, Sir Suma, the President of EBRD. Sir Suma is completing his second term as the EBRD President after a remarkably successful tenure. And now we are very honored to have him with us today. As many of you know, Sir Suma served at highest levels in international development, as well as the British civil service, and he has brought that experience to bear at the EBRD. In fact, today, EBRD is responding swiftly to the economic situation caused by pandemic and has committed all its activity in 2020 and 2021 to combat COVID-19's economical impact. We know that the emerging and the developing economies will be especially hard hit in this crisis. We have talked about this at many times in DEİK webinars. And we are so pleased to have this conversation now with the President, Sir Suma, with a focus on Turkey. Mr. President, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. I'm here in my house in Oxford, England. I wish I was with you physically in Turkey, one of my favorite countries. But it is what it is, and we are in extraordinary times. But let me say a big thank you for the invitation to speak to you today. I want to thank DEİK as a whole, but also particularly Nail and Ebrd in particular for everything they've done over the years, really to deepen the relationship between EBRD and Turkey. It stands at a very, very close relationship, and it's a benchmark relationship for me. And I think DEİK and you too have really played a fundamental role. And I really enjoyed listening to your opening remarks. In fact, you've said a lot of things I'm going to say as well, but let me say it anyway for emphasis. As Ebrd says, I'm coming to the end of my time as EBRD president. I, in fact, finished my second term and I moved back into becoming a private citizen in about 2 weeks' time. It's been 8 very exciting years, I think, at the helm of what I actually very strongly now believe, EBRD, it's an institution of genuinely global value. And so this is actually one of my last public engagements as EBRD president, and I'm glad I'm really doing it with the Turkish business sector, a sector that I really admire very much. It's very fitting, I think, that this last session should be devoted to Turkey and organized by a body which represents the country's private sector at its very finest, in my view. So it gives me a chance, I think, also to express my absolute faith in Turkey's prospects as an economic powerhouse in its own region, but also, as I'll say, I think beyond its own region as well. And to emphasize once again the role that the EBRD has played and will continue to play, I'm absolutely sure, in the country's historic journey forwards. I'm very proud, actually, of the way the EBRD has been at Turkey's side throughout all the recent volatility experienced in the country, of course. And that faith in Turkey and its future endures despite the very difficult times we're living through together right now. It endures, I think, because I have huge confidence in the talent and the energy of men and women such as the members of DEİK as well. And that confidence, I think, stems from everything that we at the EBRD have learned from our decade now, nearly 11 years of investing in your country. But I think we can't deny that we're in a very, very grave situation globally in terms of what the virus has done to economies around the world. The pandemic and its impact, I think, represent for us the most serious challenge that the EBRD regions have ever faced. Indeed, I think there's been no comparable global crisis in my lifetime. I think there's no disputing that the shock inflicted on our economies and population as a whole is very grave. Value destruction, I think, is still a major threat, as many economic activities are suspended. Businesses are fighting against potential insolvency. At the same time, the sudden and significant growth of the state, I think, also calls into question some of the principles, of course, that we at the EBRD were founded to champion. Of course, the paramount role of markets in sustainable economies. I think the crisis also risks derailing some of the very hard-won achievements that our countries of operations like Turkey have secured with our help in recent years. So it sometimes feels as though this pandemic changes everything. It changes the world of work. It changes the nature of capitalism, maybe. It changes what we think about globalization, supply chains, trade, international travel. Also, the modern city. What is it for now? I think those are just some of the few areas that this virus is really upending in our world. I'm sure also that many of our personal lives have also been deeply touched by the virus itself. Now, the pandemic hit Turkey at a difficult time, as we all know. The economy was actually recovering quite well in my view, from the 2018 volatility of the lira, but it still remained fragile, that recovery. Tourism has been hit hard by border closures, disruption to travel. Several Turkish industries, not least auto manufacturing, have suffered supply chain interruptions as well. And on the demand side, the lockdown has depressed domestic consumption, the driver of Turkish growth in recent years. Of course, external demand will also fall, particularly if contraction in the European Union is prolonged. In the face of the loss of revenues, corporates, particularly SMEs, I think, may also struggle to service some of their loans, again increasing pressure on the financial system. Now, the EBRD, we pride ourselves on the speed of our response to crises, and this pandemic has proved once again how fast the EBRD can react to major upheavals. By mid-March, we were the first multilateral development bank to launch an emergency crisis response. This was our COVID-19 solidarity package, focusing on providing urgent liquidity to existing clients. A few weeks later, our shareholders had approved a comprehensive series of additional response and recovery measures to build on that initial package. And we'll be committing, as Ebrd said earlier, we'll be committing practically all of our activity this year and next year to countering the impact of the pandemic and supporting economic recovery. In financial terms, that will amount to some 21 billion euros. Now, I think all international financial institutions, of course, are responding to this challenge, the COVID-19 challenge. And we're coordinating very closely with the other institutions too. But every institution has its own strengths. And the EBRD is building upon its decade-long experience of swift and efficient crisis response. So let's take Turkey. We started investing in Turkey in the immediate aftermath of the global financial crisis of 2008. So we've been with you in good times and in the more challenging times as well. of the past years, supporting the economy after the coup attempt and now responding immediately and strongly to the needs of the Turkish corporate sector and the banking sector as well. What all that means for Turkey is that we are already processing COVID-19 response projects worth some 1 billion euros already. We're doing so mainly through banks, but also through a liquidity and working capital facility for clients from the infrastructure, industry, commerce, agribusiness, and energy sectors as well, across many sectors. Now, since the start of the pandemic, we've already channeled about 450 million euros to key Turkish banks, Denizbank, Garanti BBVA, QNB Finansbank, Yapı Kredi, and Akbank as well, to boost lending to the private sector. And we provided 110 million euros in financing to Energisa to ensure the continuity of power distribution, operations, and investments during the pandemic. We didn't want any disruption to that. Crucially also, we're thinking ahead, beyond just the urgent requirements of today and towards the longer term challenges that the Turkish economy, of course, faces. And those longer term challenges include issues such as gender and economic inclusion, green transition, and support, of course, for refugees. Turkey has been so generous in handling the refugee issue that also that's a big challenge that we must help with as well. So right now we're funding green upgrades at Turk Telecom. This is with financing worth some 90 million euros. We're investing 45 million euros in financing energy efficiency in Turkey's schools. And we've supported Anadolu Etap, Turkey's largest fruit producer, with a 60 million euro loan, which will benefit farmers and rural communities, including women and Syrian refugees. And on top of all of this financial support, we will, I think more than ever before actually, be providing advice to the government on policy reforms. It'll help the government, of course, but it will also benefit you in the private sector. That's the ultimate purpose of these reforms. One such area, I think, where really a lot of attention is required in Turkey, particularly, is skills. We're working both with the government and our private sector partners on various skills and training programs for youth and women across the country. Now, I mentioned earlier that it sometimes feels as though the virus has changed everything. Well, let me now stress what it hasn't changed. What hasn't changed is that the EBRD is still dedicated to building sustainable, open market economies and promoting private enterprise across 3 continents. I might add that the EBRD's capital position is extremely strong, stronger than actually even before the global financial crisis of some 12 years ago. We're AAA rated. Our profits last year were a near record 1.4 billion euros. And that puts us, I think, in a better position than ever, really, to work with our clients and partners, people such as yourselves. And frankly, it's always very, very exciting to have Turkish businesses as our partners. Like those, I think, who came before you, we've always had a keen understanding with Turkish business about the opportunities to be had across the region and along the trading routes across it. And remember, the EBRD is never, ever a fair weather friend. It's a friend for all weathers. We have been at your side throughout the turbulence of recent years, the volatility in currency markets, for example. And we hope that this crisis can help to heal some of the divisions in Turkey and highlight, I think, particularly the importance of the rule of law, the predictability in policy that foreign investors and domestic investors all want. Now, Turkey was, of course, as you heard from both Nail and Ebrd, one of the EBRD's founding shareholders back in 1991, when the country was first flexing its muscles as a coming economic power. I remember this period well. I was involved in the creation of the EBRD as a junior desk officer, and I had just visited Turkey on my first ever trip, actually. So that, for me, is a really important symbolic time, actually, in the engagement with Turkey in the international economic system. And EBRD was part of that as well. But the EBRD's decision, I think, to actually start investing in Turkey was a truly historic moment. Historic because Turkey was the first country that we began working in which had never belonged to the communist bloc. It was always a mixed economy. It had not been a state-dominated economy. and had a private sector and entrepreneurial culture. So it was a big change in the EBRD's business model, if you like. And such a departure from previous practice was, at that time, it had quite a few critics. How mistaken those critics were. In only 4 years in Turkey, we went from 0 to 1 billion euros of investment annually, with even larger volumes later. More than a decade now after we began investing in the Turkish economy, the idea that of an EBRD without Turkey as a key country of operations is simply unthinkable. The total volume of our investments in Turkey now stands at 12.6 billion euros in just under 320 projects. It is by far the largest economy that we currently work in, and our portfolio in Turkey is much bigger than anywhere else where we invest. And for 4 years in a row, actually, Turkey was our largest country of operations, and it is still the one where we achieve the highest transition impact. That's our impact in development terms. So what hasn't changed, I think, only strengthens my faith that the relationship between EBRD and Turkey will grow even closer. And that the way forward for my bank and your country is one of enhanced cooperation and more and more and more impact. Of course, Turkey is a leader in many other ways. The international community, I think, is still in awe of the way Turkey has opened its doors to one of the world's largest refugee communities. But its power to inspire and lead by example within the EBRD regions across our 38 countries of operations, that power to inspire and lead cannot be exaggerated. Turkey actually is pivotal, in my view, in linking East and West, not just because of its location, of course that's important, but also because of its knowledge and successful experience of transition. And I think we are very proud of what we've done to help Turkey further integrate into regional trade networks, to share its financial and commercial expertise much more widely. And Turkey has often proved that the EBRD's business model and its focus on the private sector can deliver change in many different kinds of countries. Turkey, after all, is not afraid to expand to more difficult markets, Central Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, all of which need investment and know-how. We at the EBRD, we strongly share that philosophy. We actually highly appreciate the leadership of the Turkish government in supporting that vision of our future and its relevance to the world's development goals. Our experience in Turkey actually has been a major factor in our success in the southern and eastern Mediterranean. In 2012, we began operations in Egypt, in Morocco, Tunisia and Jordan. Lebanon followed later. We're also investing in the West Bank and Gaza now. And now another large country from that region, Algeria, will soon become an EBRD shareholder and will, I have no doubt, become a country of operations before too long. That's, of course, going to be a decision for EBRD governors, including our Turkish governor. Turkey is also very, very active within our governance. In the board of directors, I really want to thank our former Turkish board director, Tashkin Temiz. He's leaving the EBRD board after 3 very, very successful years representing not only Turkey, but also Romania, Moldova, the Kyrgyz Republic, and Azerbaijan. And Tashkin's successor, Çağatay Emirgi, is about to join the EBRD board from the Ministry of Finance and Treasury. And I'm sure Çağatay will continue the great cooperation with my colleagues in senior management and with my successor. And like Tashkin and his illustrious predecessors, Memdu Akçay and Ebrd Dilekli, I think he'll also be an authoritative voice on our board and a champion of our countries of operations as well. So successful has been our experience of working in Turkey over the last decade, investment here, that we've actually often used Turkey, we call it a sandbox, but really it's a laboratory for us in many ways, in where we experiment, we try out new ideas, launch new products with our Turkish private sector friends. And an excellent example of this is the EBRD's groundbreaking Women in Business program. This has now been rolled out in 18 countries. But in fact, I think we should be proud to call it Made in Turkey. It provides access to finance through credit lines to local banks, dedicated to women-led small and medium-sized enterprises. It provides business advice, training and support to female entrepreneurs and women-led businesses. And in Turkey, the land where this product was first created, it has now reached 20,000 businesswomen and has been a huge success elsewhere as well. Another Ebrd made in Turkey innovation was a credit enhancement scheme that we put together to finance that state-of-the-art hospital in Elazig via the first ever greenfield infrastructure bond in Turkey. Elazig is one of the 3 operational hospitals that we financed in Turkey, and we'd like to think we've therefore played a role in the healthcare sector's, I think, rather excellent performance during this pandemic. And one very recent example of an Ebrd innovation, which is again being trialed in Turkey, as announced last week, is our partnership with the JP Morgan Chase Foundation to support small businesses, especially those led by women. And this is the result of our first ever grant from a private philanthropic organization. And it's a very exciting development for us, as well as Turkish SMEs, of course. So ladies and gentlemen, what is now the way forward for Ebrd in Turkey? Well, our country strategy that was approved before the pandemic envisaged 4 main priorities for our work in Turkey. First, strengthening the resilience of the financial sector and developing domestic capital and financial markets. Second, fostering Turkey's knowledge economy, higher value-added activities, as well as promoting good governance, of course. Third, promoting economic inclusion, gender equality through our private sector engagement. And fourth, accelerating Turkey's green economy transition and regional energy connectivity. Now, here again, in my view, nothing has changed, except perhaps now the overriding imperative to use the situation we find ourselves in to actually tilt even more towards green and even more boldly than we were doing before. Not to lose momentum in our efforts to reduce carbon emissions and manage the long-term climate emergency. So we'll also be pushing for what we call a just transition as well. Funds and policies and skills invested in diversification and creating new sustainable jobs in the low carbon economy. At the same time, I also want to highlight one new opportunity which comes from our current situation, our current predicament, and one I think that is going to be of great interest, I think, to the private sector in Turkey. I think it's clear that one of the most important consequences of the pandemic and the disruptions it has inflicted on global supply chains is much greater scrutiny of supply chains. I think in the new world that we're now entering, companies are going to be putting considerable emphasis on resilience and diversification of supply chains. They're going to have to survive, to recover, to once again flourish. And I think it's no secret in many sectors, a single economy, often China, is currently the dominant global supplier. Now, the Ebrd regions as a whole have therefore the potential, I think, to significantly scale up their exports. Indeed, I think Turkey actually is one of the countries which stands to gain most from this new dynamic. We've used a concept known as revealed comparative advantage. We used it to look at the countries where we work to measure the extent to which they could benefit from a shift of supply chains away from one dominant partner, China. For the economists among you, I think you'll be interested to know that the revealed comparative advantage, or RCA for short, it's defined as the ratio of the product of a product's share in a country's total exports and the share of that product in global trade. And our study found that of all of our countries of operations, all 38 countries of operations, Turkey has an RCA in the largest number of product groups, no less than 189 product groups. In other words, Turkey is probably best placed to make this switch on the value chains if it wished to do so. So one example, apparel, textiles, they stand out as one sector in which Turkey could benefit from diversification away from, say, China. Turkey's clothing sector exports stood at almost 16 billion euros, I think, last year, compared with China's 150 billion euros. There's clearly scope here for trade diversion, particularly as Turkey has a significant delivery deadline advantage over the Far East. And I also take this opportunity if I may, to argue for changes to the Turkey-EU customs union. I think really to ensure that it works better for both parties, in my view, but it also allows Turkey to take advantage of this trend much more than it can at the moment. I think in a world of increased regionalization of economic activity, shortening supply chains and reducing geopolitical uncertainty, I think the development of closer relationships between Turkey and the EU would actually benefit both parties. I'm sure that most of you would agree with that as well. So I think the customs union agreement does need to look at and should be upgraded, in my view. And ladies and gentlemen, I hope that at the end of this little speech that you now understand why I have such absolute faith in Turkey's future as an economic powerhouse, both in its own region, but beyond. Of course, we expect Turkish GDP to contract quite sharply this year. That's not unusual. Turkey will be in good company in that situation. But we're also forecasting a very robust recovery of 6% growth in 2021 for Turkey. The way forward for the EBRD in Turkey is, I think, one that is marked by closer and closer cooperation, in particular with the private sector, with partners such as yourselves. It's also one that's got to be marked by even more impact as we go forward. I think, as I suggested earlier, it really does feel sometimes as though the pandemic has changed everything. Here I am, as I said, speaking from home, despite the EBRD banner behind me. This has been my office for 3 months plus now. I think another example of the way everything has changed, I really note one very good indicator. The Economist, which is not known for its fondness for modern Turkey's policies, The Economist has recently conceded that Turkey has handled the pandemic better than most. So I leave the EBRD safe in the knowledge, I think, that the relationship between the bank and Turkey, with both the government and the private sector, is stronger than ever before. And I look forward to watching and cheering from the sidelines that relationship mature further and blossom in the years ahead. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mr. President. I liked the phrase, a friend in all weathers. I think this is great to see EBRD is a friend of Turkey and hope that this will continue. And as Sir Suma said, EBRD's 21 billion euro economic rescue package is so critical at this moment. And we think that I think that this is going to help to heal the economical problems and accelerate the investments. And as DEİK, we are also committed to focusing on this issue, not just looking at the current crisis, but looking ahead, as you've also described, looking the way forward, the more collaboration and what's coming into the global economy, and to take a part in that in the future. And we're also looking to be more creative and more innovative in the working platforms as we think all these issues. And I think EBRD has really been at the forefront of that, and also not only a model for us, but also a model for all other financial institutions. And now we are going to the Q&A session, as we have promised. And many questions has already been arrived, and we have organized these questions. And I will be directing to you one by one. But before that, would like to start with President Olpak, who has always asked the most difficult questions. Over to you, Mr. President.
No. Thank you, Ebrd, and thank you, Sir Suma. In fact, I had prepared 4 or 5 questions. Do you prefer I ask them all and you continue, because when you are touching, when you are speaking, you touch some of the questions, but if you don't mind, let me continue how I had prepared.
Sure.
Will I continue all together?
Yes, I'm very happy. You go ahead. In any way you feel comfortable, it's fine.
Okay, thank you again. Now, what is the sense you get from discussions with colleagues at other institutions or with political leaders about the role that the private sector should play in rebuilding the global economy post-COVID? And what advice would you give specifically to our DEİK members in this regard? Would you expect global boom-bust cycles to occur more frequently in the coming years? This was the first question. You see, Ebrd, it's not so difficult. What role does the EBRD envisage having in Turkey in the post-COVID age? Are there any particular sectors which you think are likely to be a focus for the way forward? The second one, and what do you think are the key Turkish markets that need investment over the coming years, either because of their strength potential or their challenges? And how do you think Turkey can strengthen its cooperation ties with Europe and Balkans? Of course, this is very important for Turkey. And finally, this may be a little bit difficult question, Sir Suma. As the interest rates are at the record low levels, would you think it will be time for the rise of the ECG finance? This is all from my part. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All of them were tough questions, Nail. So none of them were easy. But let me try my best to answer some of them. I'm not convinced that we're going into a period of global boom and bust cycles. This, I think, was a truly unusual situation. I mean, it's the first situation in our lifetimes where governments actually took a conscious decision to reduce economic growth. I mean, that's the implicitly what they did in order to handle the virus. And I think that is unlikely to happen again. We've clearly probably underestimated, all of us, governments, institutions, private sector, that there are more pandemics around in the last 15, 20 years, and we probably should prepare much better for them. And therefore, I think the health systems is one of the issues that we will face. I think the resilience of some economies has been greater than others, partly because government policies have been better, but also because I think they have had infection rates which are much lower, and they've had health systems which have managed to cope very well with them. I'm struck within the Ebrd regions, by the way, that the days it takes to double the infected number of people is very variable. So if you look at some of I'm talking about the old region of Ebrd, the Central and Eastern Europe, they coped pretty well with it, actually. I mean, the infection rate took a long, long time to double, I think 40 days plus before they doubled the number of cases. In some of the poorer regions, like in Central Asia or North Africa, it doubled in 16 days. And that tells you something about the power of the health systems to cope with these sort of situations. So I actually don't necessarily see a boom and bust cycle, but I think there is a huge issue facing governments and the private sector in rebuilding in the recovery. I think one of the issues is going to be whether in some economies the state begins to think that it has a bigger role to play in the economy going forward. So from Ebrd, we're all about building sustainable market economies. I would be concerned if governments showed an appetite to return to a greater share of GDP being in the state's hands. So if governments start saying, these are now strategic industries and the state must therefore control either through, through majority shares or some other ways through control of their boards, I think that is a concern. So far, the good news across our countries of operations, all 38 of them, is I'm not seeing that, actually. And one of the reasons is because the governments themselves are very stretched. Their budgets are under deep pressure, so it's not as if they can really spend money to try and swallow up private sector companies either. So what I think we have really got to focus on, those of us who believe in the private sector as being still the motor for economic growth and in the rebuilding and recovery, is strong support for all the sorts of reforms in the investment climate that would help the private sector actually speed up. So I think actually there's an opportunity. I talked about the challenge, and now the opportunity actually is to say, look, here are the reforms that we in the private sector, DEİK, others, we've wanted for many years in Turkey, let's say, and the same, your counterparts in other countries would say the same. These are the reforms we were looking for. If you want a fast recovery, if you want to beat the Ebrd forecast of 6% for next year and actually have even sharper growth, we need these reforms to happen even faster than we were planning. So actually we can invest more. So I think there's an opportunity where EBRD can help, of course, facilitate, of actually pushing governments to actually speed up reforms that would help the private sector. That's the way I'd like the dialogue to go. In some EBRD countries, we have these investment councils, which we set up with government, private sector, and EBRD. And I think I'm seeing a rejuvenation of those investment councils as a way of actually pushing governments to do much more on the reform side to make it easier for the private sector to invest, I think. Particular sectors in Turkey for EBRD, well, I always have trouble answering this question because we're in just about every sector in Turkey. Because it's such a large, diversified economy, I think we're going to be in a number of sectors. I would say, though, there are some themes. I mean, I brought out the country strategy themes already, but I think there's some new themes that particularly will be important in Turkey. And this will be embedded in our next 5-year strategy for the bank as a whole, not just for Turkey, but for the whole bank. 2 of them, Turkey is a leader in already. So that's, for example, the green economy transition. You know, Turkey's one of our best examples of how we work with the private sector in Turkey to have much more sustainable production processes. And, you know, you score very highly on that. And I think we're going to roll out the next 5-year green economy transition strategy very soon. And frankly, I think Turkey's already in a head start on some of the products and ideas that we have. So I'm not worried about that in Turkey's case. And I think we have a set of business leaders who are all here who are strong believers in this. So we're pushing at an open door. The second area where Turkey has had a head start, but I think not just Turkey, I think many countries are finding this a challenge, is this pandemic. It's not a democratic pandemic. You know, just because you know, in the UK, our Prime Minister, Prince Charles also both suffered from this virus. This pandemic, I think, is having what I would call distributional consequences. All the gains that Turkey and other countries have made on having a more equal playing field for different types of people, for example, female entrepreneurs. I mean, I gave the example of women in business because Turkey has been the leader for us in this. I am worried that the principle that you see in many recessions of last in, first out, that it is particularly women in the labor force or young people who've joined recent labor force, they're the ones who get hit first by this. That is a concern. So I think a big second theme will be trying to make sure, not just tilting to green, but tilting to inclusion, as I like to call it. I mean, so to try to make sure that we actually push against those factors. So equality of opportunity, I think, is going to be a big theme. And again, Turkey has a lead, but this is a lead that needs consolidating, I think, on this. And the third area is a new area for us, for Turkey, for everyone, I think. You know, 2 years ago, EBRD did this study on the future of work. And I was writing then about, you know, what technology might do for the way we in EBRD do business. I wrote a paper for my colleagues. I got absolutely no responses whatsoever because people couldn't really envisage this is going to happen. And I personally thought it wasn't going to happen like this, but look at this situation. This is the future of work. We have arrived at the future earlier than we expected. So technology, what we call digital transition, I think will be a big theme going ahead. And here, again, Turkey has some comparative advantages, I think, in use of that. You know, I think your private sector is more tech savvy. I think your government has greater capability and capacity and understanding of the technological possibilities. If I contrast that with some of our much poorer countries of operations, I think they really will struggle to have an equal say in this whole digital transition. And therefore, there's an asymmetry, as I call it, of information for some of those countries. And I think EBRD will have to do a lot more than that. And again, I think Turkey could be a good sandbox laboratory for trying out this area of work for the future. So I think those are 3 themes which cut across all the sectors in Turkey. I do think the Turkish health sector, though I will highlight that, and the tourism sector, two sectors that need even more investment. I'm proud of what we've done on the hospitals, and you know that story. I think the tourism sector is fundamental to the economy. We know that as well, and we need it to recover fast. And we are hoping that actually the situation will improve very quickly on that front as well. On the European Union and the Balkans, I think the thing to say there is I do actually think there should be what I would call an upgrade in the customs union arrangements with the EU. I think there's already some anecdotal evidence of some European firms, I think, who are now shifting their supply chains to Turkey. At the early stages of this pandemic, they were doing that. The customs union facilitated that. But I think what we need is really an upgrade of the customs union. And this, at the moment, it really covers only goods, trade in goods. I would like to see that expanded to trade in services as well. And I think both sides need to focus in on that. The Western Balkans, particularly, I would say the 6 countries of the Western Balkans, is a huge opportunity. Of course, you have historical links to the region anyway. One of your former directors at the Ebrd, I think his family is originally from one of the countries in the Western Balkans. So there are deep links, and we've worked with Turkish companies in the Western Balkans. The reason I think it's really worth focusing on that region is they are now moving at pace to reform and do the right things on projects as well to move towards European Union membership. So the decision that very recently on North Macedonia and Albania is very helpful indeed. Montenegro is further ahead, of course. There's real opportunity because I think the leaderships of those countries are very, very interested in moving rapidly to close the gaps and close the chapters that they have to close to join the European Union. And there's investment opportunities coming. And I think obviously Ebrd would love to be a partner for the Turkish private sector in many of those opportunities. A lot of those opportunities will have to be cross-border. Each of those economies probably on their own are just too small to justify huge investments. But there's huge cross-border needs, I think, in hard connectivity, roads, railways, and so on, but energy as well. And I think there's also soft connectivity opportunities as well, digital and others. And we're the largest institutional investor in the Western Balkans. I think we're going to be doing something like 1.5, 1.6 billion in the 6 countries this year. So please come and invest with us. And we're happy to be working with the Turkish private sector there. So I think it's a real opportunity. Interest rates, yeah, this is a low. I mean, this is, in my view, this is a good time for governments and export credit agencies, others, to take advantage of this. So I think this is a time where the old story of those who are fiscal austerity merchants, as I call them, I think they're in retreat. And this is a time where we can all think about borrowing at rates that are historically quite low and really trying to just boost the recovery as fast as we can for that. And I think export credit agencies I put in the same basket as the others on this one. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, actually. And there are some other questions lined up, and our time is moving on. And some of the questions you've already answered. Thank you for that, Sir Suma. But I have a couple that still needs answers, I think. Out of which is, you also briefly said that we have seen a significant increase in the government intervention across the world. So do you envisage that this may have long-term impacts on the future of the public-private partnerships where Ebrd is a big financier as well?
So PPPs, and again, this is one where Turkey has been the Ebrd's best friend, really. So we've done a lot of PPP investments, as you know, in the hospital sector in Turkey. And again, that learning, that experience is being taken to other countries too. So I actually do not at the moment see any slowdown on the PPP front from the countries we're operating in. I mean, I won't go into the details of projects, but in Egypt, the Dry Port project, 6 October project, the Sofia Airport project in Bulgaria, the couple of port projects in Ukraine. There's a hospital project, more than one probably, in Kazakhstan, which is very much modeled on what we've done in Turkey. So I'm seeing quite a lot of PPP activity. I think that's partly because the government budget deficits have been growing. And so governments have been worried about not letting them grow too much. And so there is actually still a good opening for PPP work. We're not seeing cancellations. We're seeing perhaps some delay, some re-evaluations in some countries as governments reassess their infrastructure spending. But I think there's actually a reasonable flow of activity on PPPs going forward. I do think more and more people are going to come and look at your hospital building program under the PPP because of the way it helped to respond to the pandemic. So I think you're actually going to be under the microscope a lot, which is probably a good thing. It's another way of marketing Turkey, by the way, to the rest of the world as a country which is quite innovative in the way it does these things. So it's funny that Britain and Turkey probably are, two of the leaders on PPPs. We should be talking to each other across this virtual way. So I think we've financed 8 Turkish hospitals now, and 3 of them are now operational. So we will remain a big PPP supporter in Turkey and elsewhere.
Thank you very much. And thanks for your comments about how Turkey handled the health system, health issues in the pandemic times. I think we were the most successful country, yeah. I think, that has done, and thanks for supporting the hospital deals. There was a question about the customs union, and you also already answered that. I mean, we have to upgrade the Turkish customs union, and we have a working group on that, specifically working to support how we can do it in the fastest time. But unfortunately, this has been waiting on the agenda for a long time, but we really would like to push it and give our support as DEİK European Council there as well.
Yeah.
There has been some significant talk across Europe of the importance of the green recovery from coronavirus, with the particular focus on the EU's Green Deal. What part can Turkey play in the Green Deal, and how will the Green Deal affect EBRD's investments in the future?
So the EBRD, we strongly support the European Green Deal. We feel we've also helped shape it in some of the dialogue we've had with Brussels. I think obviously, as I say, it's really crucial that we all stay very committed and focused on the climate challenge going forward. I mean, we have this track record among the multilateral development banks. We are the sort of seen as the leaders on this, particularly in the private sector. Last year, I think in 2019, we had a record of nearly 50%, 46% of our investments were in green finance. And Turkey was above that. I mean, I think Turkey, year after year, tends to have a very high green economy ratio in our investments. I think EBRD can strongly contribute to delivery of the European Green Deal through our investment operations, our policy dialogue, and that is what we'll do. And I hope in the next few weeks that our board of directors will approve the next 5-year push on the green economy, even higher targets, but also a widening of products as well, I hope, that will be offered to the Turkish private sector and others. I mean, obviously, as you're a member of the customs union, I think Turkey should be watching the Green Deal developments very closely. And, you've had this very strong appetite, I think, for green in public and private sector with its energy efficiency, zero waste, renewables. And I think we have held up the example of the work we did together on the National Energy Efficiency Action Plan and also National Renewable Energy Action Plan in Turkey, because we're a leading financier of renewables. But that is also a very good example of great dialogue with the government to try and get those policies and plans agreed. We've held those up as examples to the European Union of how an emerging market in the neighborhood can actually move forward. So I do think, Turkey should engage very strongly with the EU on this, but ultimately, it's delivery of projects and investments that will really prove, I think, to the European Union that Turkey is, one of the best markets for this sort of work on the Green Deal. One thing I would say is really important, I think, going forward. I think investors, Turkish investors, foreign investors, I think we'll need some clarity on the new renewable energy support scheme in Turkey. That is being worked on, but I think it's important that work is finished quite soon to give clarity to the investors, so they have some certainty about what they're getting themselves into. But I think Turkey will be a strong destination for implementation of the European Green Deal. That's where I'm coming from.
It's very good to know. And I'd like to pass to another region, to sub-Saharan Africa. You know, Turkish business is very entrepreneurial, and we have a lot of investments in Africa. We have a lot of business in Africa. Do you think that how EBRD can work in the post-COVID economic times in Africa, in a partnerships? What do you think about that?
Well, Ebru, you mentioned Senegal at the beginning for your own company. I mean, look, it's no secret, and I'm in my last 2 weeks, so I can, you know, perhaps have some license. It's no secret that I believe EBRD should be expanding to sub-Saharan Africa. I think if you look at the development needs, and if you look at the private sector financing needs, sub-Saharan Africa is the biggest challenge and also the biggest opportunity, actually, for business people. And EBRD, that's what we do. And so it's also no secret that many of our Turkish clients and clients from Morocco, from Egypt, and Tunisia and other places have all said to us they would like to go with us into sub-Saharan Africa. So we would very much like to do this. We, the management, this is. It is not, in the end, a decision for the management. We would like to do this. We are proposing it. I'm hopeful in the next strategy for the EBRD that at least there'll be acknowledgement that this is an important issue and should be looked at in detail, but looked at fast. You know, we can procrastinate and procrastinate, but we've done all the analysis. We've been helped by the Turkish business sector, by the you know, open sharing of what you have found in terms of business, making business work in sub-Saharan Africa. We thank you for that, actually. And we have made the case. The evidence is clear. It now needs a political decision. And, you know, Berat Albayrak has made absolutely fundamentally clear what Turkey's position is. And he is a important shareholder. At the 10th anniversary of EBRD's operations in Turkey last year in Istanbul on the banks of the Bosphorus, he stood on stage and said, Turkish cabinet has taken a decision to support EBRD's expansion into sub-Saharan Africa. I hope the other shareholders will also get along with that. I think the countries of operations definitely are supportive, which is good. They know what EBRD does very well. They know what it can do. And we have capital. So no one actually would lose because we could continue investing at high levels in every country we're in and expand as well. But the important thing is the opportunity that you and your company and other Turkish companies have already found in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think we have a responsibility as a multilateral bank to offer ourselves to help with that, with seizing that opportunity. So I'm hopeful it'll happen. It'll happen after I go, but it'll happen at some point.
Yes, then we'll knock the door of the EBRD as a Turkish business to fund. Yeah. So, Mr. President, thank you very much for your answers. There has been a lot of issues and points that you've raised, a lot of wonderful insights on the future of work, the future of development, the sectors like the tourism sector, as you said, that Turkey is very strong at, global supply chains, European Union, and so forth. And before I end, I'd like to turn to our President Olpak for his final comments for this webinar.
In fact, I don't know what to say after all these remarkable comments, but it was an honor for us to have Sir Suma during his last few weeks' time on this webinar. After 8 years of fully active presidency, this was very valuable for us. I believe somehow in some part of the world where we will be together, of course, the life is going on. I just want to thank again. This was very honorable for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olpak. And I'd like to give the final word to Sir Suma for his final thoughts and comments about the webinar.
Well, thank you very much again for the invitation and the opportunity to speak to so many Turkish private sector companies in this way. So a big thanks to DEİK, of course, to Nail, and to you, Ebrd, as well, for giving us this opportunity. But can I maybe end by saying I think Turkey has a huge positive prospects ahead. I think you're an economy which has got so much going for it, so much potential within Turkey, but I think the next stage is also to maximize that potential outside Turkey. One of the things I most loved doing during my 8 years was every time I would get on a Turkish Airlines plane, I would look at the magazine and look at the back of the magazine. And every time I looked, I saw the expansion of the flight routes to some new country. And this tells me, I don't think Turkish Airlines is just doing this for fun. They're doing it because Turkish business is reaching out to new markets. So you're a great example, I think, to us in Ebrd, to other countries of operations that we work in. And I think, we have really succeeded together. And we've done it in a partnership that I think is fantastic. I hope that I will stay engaged in emerging markets work and future anyway. And I hope definitely to stay engaged with Turkey going forward. But you have a great office, Ebrd office in Istanbul, another one in Ankara as well. Arvid Turkner, our managing director, is also on this webinar. That team is there to help serve the Turkish private sector. And we have teams everywhere else too, in the Western Balkans, in other countries too. So please, as a shareholder, use those offices for the market intelligence you, the Turkish private sector, want on what is happening in these countries. It's free. It's a free good. My successor may charge for it, but I didn't. So use it now while you can. And really, I think the future is very bright for Turkey and its private sector.
Thank you very much, Sir Suma. Yes, Turkish Airlines is the airline that flies to the maximum number of destinations in the world. So we hope that it's going to come back. And there are a lot of things on the calendar, on the agenda, a lot to digest in 1.5 hours. I've learned so much. And it's been a very fruitful conversation. I'd like to thank to you both, to Mr. Olpak and Mr. Suma, for your contribution and your ideas. And for the people, for our guests who are joining us today or around the world, thank you so much. And as a final word, I believe that the cooperation and solidarity will be the key words going forward. Cooperation and solidarity at the local level, at the national level, and even at the global level. And I'm very hopeful that the Turkey-Ebrd fruitful relationship will be accelerated. And the solidarity will bring us new opportunities for us, not only in Turkey, but around the globe. And a final question before we close, Sir Suma, what's next for you? Do you have any plans?
Oh, I don't know. I think I will be involved in working with developing countries, emerging markets. It's been my passion, and I've been doing it for 40 odd years. I certainly regard Turkey as a country that I'd like to really work on in the future as well. So let's see. I think the first thing to do is actually reacquaint myself with my family, who I've not seen enough of. Although in the last few weeks, of course, I've seen a lot of them. And they may feel that I've seen too much of them. Who knows? But I Turkey. Yeah, exactly. So I think, and I'm looking forward to the reopening of travel routes and so on, so I can actually get to places like Turkey. I think it's this sort of approach works for delivery with existing clients, but if you want to build new clients, or if you want to have new government relationships, I think you need first to have face-to-face contact to build empathy in a relationship. Then you can rely on the technology afterwards. And I think that's going to be the big test for me and for everyone else going forward.
Thank you very much. We hope to see you in Turkey as your first stop after Oxford Street, please. We look to host you here. We are sure that our roads will be again crossed. And we hope that with Ebrd we'll be friends in all weathers. Thanks for this praise as well. And thanks for everyone for joining. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.